So, Congressman Curtis, I think you'd like to share a few thoughts before we get started.
Hello. Yes, thanks, Adriel, and thank you for being our moderator for tonight. A special shout out to my whole staff. You might imagine this takes quite a bit of work to pull off. Thanks to everybody for being involved. I'm going to state the obvious right up front. I'm just really sorry we can't do this in person. And I look forward to the time when we can do these in person again. It's one of my favorite parts of being in Congress is being in front of you, answering questions, and having good, frank conversations. I'm going to reiterate something that Adriel said. Our format tonight, we're experimenting with a little bit, and what we're using is if you'll use the Q&A box to give us your question, not the chat box, the Q&A. We'll try to work through those questions as quickly as we can. And I'm anxious to hear what's on your mind. So, Adriel, do we have our first question?
Yes, our first question is going to come from Clark Merkley. Just one moment. Okay, Clark. Okay, Clark, you're unmuted. You should be able to go ahead now.
Okay, I thought I would ask a question in the Q&A, but so with the election coming up pretty soon, is there realistically any chance that any pieces of legislation will be coming up between now and then?
Well, you probably know, Clark, we were just called back to Washington over the weekend in what many considered a surprise vote. And I would have never guessed that would have happened. So I'm going to say I don't see any substantial legislation between now and the election, but I'm also geared up for surprises. And I think that one of those surprises could be some COVID legislation. Right now, we haven't been able to find the common ground. But it wouldn't surprise me if we got called back again in the next few weeks to vote on COVID legislation. There are a number of things pending. It would be nice to get taken care of if we could. And I think we'll see some legislation go through. But as far as significant legislation, I think a lot of times people think of maybe immigration legislation or infrastructure legislation. I really don't see anything except for perhaps some COVID legislation, hopefully.
Okay, thank you very much. Our next question is going to come from Shem Lichty. Go ahead, Shem.
Thanks. Can you please tell us about the progress of the Utah Navajo Water Rights Settlement Bill HR 644?
Great. I'm glad you're following that. If you're following it, you probably know, but let me state for some of our other listeners just a little bit about it. Over the years, the state of Utah has been working with the Navajo Nation to resolve some water claims, and it's substantial. I'm going off the top of my head, I think $100 million or so that's owed to the Navajos. It's a really good example of even good legislation that's supported by all sides is hard to get through. We have passed that through. I think that we're very, very close on it, getting it through both houses. It does enjoy broad bipartisan support. The whole entire delegation supports it. And I think it's just a matter of getting it across the finish line with the right package that might come before us. But I anticipate that should be able to be completed this year. I'm hopeful.
All right, our next question is going to come from Ronald Zundel. Okay, go ahead. You can ask your question to the congressman.
Okay, my question has to do with mail-in voting. There just seems to be a lot of activity. I don't really understand what's going on with it, but I am very concerned that if it becomes a national trend, that our votes, number one, be received and recorded, and somehow they're verified to us.
Yeah. So, Ron, hang on the line, because I'd love, after I answer your question, to see if you feel like I really answered, or if you have other questions about nuances of it. I have spent a considerable amount of time on this very topic myself, trying to find out exactly what's real, what's not real, and what people should worry about. Let me state, first of all, how impressed I am with Now I'm in Utah County, so I'm going to use Utah County, but I actually think this goes much broader than Utah County. Our state and local leaders are on top of this. And I have a huge amount of confidence here in Utah that people's votes will be received, they'll be counted, they'll be verified, every signature checked, and I think it'll be amazingly accurate and timely. I'm not as confident across the United States. There was a lot of hype this last week about the post office being ready. And my personal feeling is it's not so much about the post office as it is individual states. And let me tell you what I mean by that. Some states have actually said you can request your ballot the Friday before the election. So think about that. Somebody requests it on Friday, it has to be mailed out to them over the weekend and returned, and they think that it's going to be in by Tuesday. That's near impossible. And I think states that have done that have been irresponsible and have misled their public that they're actually doing a good thing, because there's no way that ballot makes it back in many, many cases. Think especially about a rural district where that ballot can make it back in. And a lot of that's been blamed on the post office, but I think that's a little unfair to blame that on the post office, because you're talking about turnaround times that are just not realistic. You've also got election officials, county commissioners in other parts of the United States that are not as on top of it as Utah. They don't have the proper counting equipment, the proper software to do it. And I'm worried what you're going to see in the national elections. I think overall it will be accurate, but I think it will be long in coming. And you're going to see some regions, some states that are not able to report their numbers for some time after the election. And I think part of that's because this is delegated out. It's not done on a national level. It's done on a county level. And some counties are on top of it and doing a good job, and some are not.
All right, thank you very much. For our next question, we're going to go to David Folland. David, go ahead. You are free to talk.
Hi. Thank you, Congressman Curtis, for speaking yesterday at the Sutherland Institute on Confessions of a Climate Conservative. It was an awesome speech, and really appreciate that. I was wondering, though, more specifically about the Growing Solutions Act, and I appreciate your co-sponsoring that. What's the status of the act, and is there a chance it'll be passed into law in this Congress?
Well, I'm not sure if you heard one of the earlier questions was, are we going to see any significant legislation? And I regret that we're probably not in moving, and I would consider that to be significant legislation. I really, I'm not really optimistic, but bills like this, as you know, it takes a lot of momentum, and sometimes years. The Navajo Water Act, as somebody asked a little while ago about, has been in the works for years. And so sometimes bills need to be introduced. They need to go through kind of a momentum process of gathering co-sponsors and movement. And I would put this bill in that category, that it's still in that process of gaining a little bit of momentum.
All right, thank you. Our next question is coming from Ginger Woolley. Ginger, you can go ahead now.
Yes, I'm wondering about the fact that we've had very little federal guidance regarding the pandemic. It's been left up to states, counties, cities, whereas people can travel between these areas. And without having more federal guidance, I am concerned about it and wonder how you see these issues playing out and what could be done perhaps better in this regard.
First of all, Ginger, before I answer your question, hello, how are you? I hope you're doing well. I'm sorry I haven't seen you in Rock Canyon. If you'll indulge me, just on a personal note, during COVID, one of my escape mechanisms was going up Rock Canyon. And I started actually running up and running down and tore my meniscus. And so I haven't been back since, but I miss it. That's one of my favorite places on the whole planet. And thank you for all you've done to preserve and protect that area. Now, to answer your question, there's a couple of layers of complexity to this. And one of those is that what we've known about this disease has changed over time. And a really good example of that is mask wearing. early on, we were told, not to wear masks. And that, of course, has changed. And now we know that appears to be, one of the most helpful things that we're currently doing. We're learning more about how this spreads all the time. And so I share that with you because whether it's the president or the governor or county commissioners or mayors, I have a great deal of sympathy for our elected officials who have had to try to navigate this with no existing playbook. And then another layer of complexity, which I think adds to the problem, is certainly what's appropriate in New York City is not necessarily what's appropriate in San Juan County. I talked to the county commissioner down there right in the middle of it and asked him how things were going and if he was worried. And he was on his tractor right way out in the middle of nowhere. And so that's another layer of complexity, is trying to come up with guidelines that really apply in New York City and in San Juan County. Now, I'll be the first to admit, I would like to have seen clearer guidelines coming from the federal level, more specific and clearer. But I'll also come back to those 2 points that I've made, which have made that very, very difficult. At the end of the day, this is not like a whole lot of other problems that we deal with. And that is that individuals have really had to step up and just be wise, careful stewards themselves over their family, over their personal health, and over their neighborhood and things. And I do believe one of the very important things that's going to happen as this starts to fade from our consciousness is we have a lot of evidence about what worked and what didn't work. We have 50 different tests from 50 different states that all handled it differently. And I really hope that we go back in time and analyze who made good decisions, who could have made better decisions, and make sure that we're ready for the next time this comes along. I think it's fair to say that there were very few places, whether it was a country or individuals or a state, that were really totally prepared for this.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Andrew.
Our next question. Oh, sorry. Our next question will come from Clark Snellgrove. He's got a question about energy policy. And Clark, you can go ahead anytime.
Okay. I can do that. Hang on for a second. Do I need to say more? Because I'm in a meeting right this minute. And I'd like to, but they just told me it's my turn to. They just told me it's my turn to talk. So
Let's come back to Clark.
Well, I'm happy to ask the question for him.
Okay, good.
Okay.
thank you. Bye.
Okay, so he says, I'm very interested in energy policy. What is Representative Curtis's opinion on energy, and in particular nuclear energy, as an important option in the clean energy space?
Yeah, great question. And I'm hoping he's able to hear this answer. I feel strongly with a capital S that nuclear needs to be part of our energy package. There are very few energy sources that deliver as clean as nuclear. Now, that being said, we've got some work to do in technology and innovation. I'm really impressed with our county commissioners down in Emory and in Carbon County. They've been working on a project to study molten salt for nuclear reactors, which would be a lot safer and have less spent energy. And so I'm hopeful that U.S. innovation and technology move nuclear to a whole different level of safety and efficiency. But I also think clearly it's got to be part of our package moving forward. And it's really, quite frankly, one of our shortcuts to reducing carbon in the air.
Thank you, Representative.
Thank you. Glad you could hear the answer there.
Okay, our next question is going to come from Molly Hogan. Molly, just one moment. Okay, go ahead. You can ask your question now.
Hello. How do you justify voting no on the Delivering for America Act when it would help protect and save lives, especially with mail-in voting? We know in Utah it works great. Why not help expand that to the rest of the country?
So, Molly, you're referring to the bill that we voted on this Saturday?
Yes.
Yeah. So could you be more specific about what you liked about the bill? Did we lose Molly? because I can go ahead and answer a question, but I'd love to kind of talk with you. Molly, are you gone? Did we cut you off?
Go ahead, Molly. She should be able to speak.
Okay, I'm going to assume she's listening. I'm going to try to answer it the best I can.
Okay.
Molly, I spent a lot of time on this issue. And here's the reality. There is absolutely nothing in that bill that we voted on that had any impact on the election or mail-in ballots. Absolutely nothing. Let me tell you what I mean by that. The post office, so in that bill were two major provisions. One was to give the post office $25 billion. And currently the post office has in cash $14 billion. And they have a credit line of $10 billion that was given to them in one of the early COVID bills. That's enough cash to operate until well into next year. And so if the concern is this year's election, then it really had nothing to do with it. So I was concerned giving the post office $25 billion. We didn't even really know what they were going to do with it. And when they already have $24 billion available to them. And I'm the first to admit the post office needs some help and Congress needs to step up and help them. But if the concern was for the elections, then the money was really an issue. The second thing the bill did was to constrict and actually mandate to the post office that they couldn't make any changes, and any changes that they did make between January and now had to retroactively be undone. I can't imagine whether it's a business or an organization or a church or anything that you would mandate to anybody that they can't make any changes to improve themselves. Now, there have been a lot of rumors that the post office was making changes to thwart the mail-in balloting, and those simply are not true. And I would really encourage anybody who feels differently to stop their mail courier when they come by in the next few days and ask them if anybody's moving mailboxes with an untoward purpose. Ask them if overtime has been cut so they can't deliver the mail. I actually talked to the district director over Utah, over the Postal Service. He made a number of interesting comments to me. Let me just share two of them with you quickly. The first was, in his career, no one has ever, including now, I'm going to use a double negative here, not used overtime to not deliver the mail. It just simply isn't happening. The second one that's really important to notice is the increase of mail-in balloting the increase on the mail service due to mail-in balloting is somewhere between 1.5% and 3%. That's described by the district director as a bump in the road. The day we talked about that, Utah was under capacity by 500,000 letters. They had an extra capacity of 500,000, clearly increasing their volume by 1.5% is not going to be a problem. And so that's why it was actually a rather easy vote for me.
All right, thank you. For our next question, we'll go to Laura Redford. Laura, go ahead. You can ask your question now.
Hi. My question is about the political climate that we live in. And I just want to know, Representative Curtis, what you are doing to help try to find consensus or work with people across the aisle so that we get things that a lot of people in the middle might agree on and stop being quite so polarized.
I love the question. I actually believe that your view on this represents most of my constituents, if not all of them. I really believe I was sent to Washington to get things done. To be more specific, to answer your question, I feel really fortunate. I've actually been in Congress 3 years, and we've actually passed 8 bills all the way into law. In this environment, there is no way you pass any bill at all unless it's bipartisan. And so each of these bills that have had a Democratic co-sponsor, we've had to work with people to find consensus and find answers. All 8 bills have dealt with substantial issues in the district and in Utah. I regret that the stereotype is that we don't get along back there. And certainly that's true to some degree. What you see on the news is just the reflection of those who don't get along. And unfortunately, what you don't see is the many of us who actually do get along, who enjoy each other's company, who work hard to find consensus. And that happens a lot more than you actually get to see. I'll just tell you a real quick story. It's one of my favorite. I was lucky enough to be involved in a substantial public lands bill when I first went to Congress. And there was a congressman from kind of in the Southern California area who opposed my bill. And I went to his office and I laid out the maps and I showed him what I was trying to do. I looked him in the eye and I said, my goal is to get you to not hate my bill. And we developed a warm relationship. He later on actually voted for my bill. And every time, now this is pre-COVID, every time I would see him in the hall, he would stop and come up and give me a hug. He's a little bit older, a little older gentleman. And so he's been kind of invisible since COVID started. But I just have really enjoyed some friendships and some relationships. And I want you to know that I'm not alone in that there are many back there who are working hard. Those are just, unfortunately, the stories that don't make the news.
All right, thank you. Our next question is going to come from David Deals. And David, you can go ahead anytime now.
Okay, thank you. Kind of a double-edged question, but kind of go back to the clean energy thing you were talking about. And I was pleased to read in the paper that you brought up clean energy and the environmental climate problems. But I was wondering, when you talked about nuclear power needing some work, but clearly something that could be used as a non-polluting source, I was wondering, given the other power, in thinking about this, the other power generation techniques, solar, wind, whatnot, geothermal, is there a ranking right now? Do you have a priority? They're stacked up as like nuclear at the top. Is it in the middle? Is it on the side because there's more technology has to be improved? Just kind of a general question of where are we at exactly?
If you'll indulge me, I want to go backwards in time just a little bit. One of the greatest blessings of my life was to be the mayor of Provo. And Provo, as you probably know, has its own municipal power and joins with some other cities to form Utah Municipal Power Authority. And approximately, it's been 10, 12 years since I started being mayor, we were near 100% coal. And we did have some hydro, but we had really no renewables other than hydro. And hydro, in some people's book, is not renewable. And it's been really fun for me to have been kind of in a front row seat as that has transitioned. And we watched natural gas come in a totally unpredictable way, replace a lot of coal, and dramatically reduce the amount of carbon that's in the air. Something that nobody really saw coming or predicted. And I think I use that example as a lot of, look, there are a lot of answers out there. We got to be very thoughtful in how we approach things because I don't think anybody saw that one coming. It's really hard for me to rank them, and the reason it is it changes based upon geographic region. It changes based upon economics. It changes based upon innovation. But maybe if I could kind of lump them into categories, if that makes sense, that would be helpful. So let's kind of take like wind and solar and some of these renewables. Interestingly, totally unperceived, here was, I think, kind of a surprise to a lot of us that are close to this. Solar now is incredibly inexpensive and is replacing a lot of other sources that we didn't anticipate, where wind hasn't really taken off to that same degree. And so solar is really high on my list. Now, solar has a problem, and that is pretty obvious, and that is the time of day. And one of the things we need to spend some time on, I'm trying to help incentivize with some legislation as well, is storage. And once we get storage complete, my answers are going to change again for you because it's a real game changer, and solar will take a real different place. Right now, we really struggle with base power that's not a carbon source. So coal still plays a very important role. There's different ways, different types of coal. And I think part of the innovation that we need to spend time on is carbon sequestration and removing carbon from the air. And that will make coal a more viable option. But still, it's still a big part of our base load. Natural gas, I mentioned that earlier, and that's a big part of our fuel mix as well. And then I'd like to see more hydro. I think that hydro is a good answer. Now, we're quite limited in new opportunities for hydro, but I personally like hydro. And we've talked a little bit about nuclear. And one of the problems with nuclear right now is people are really not choosing nuclear because of the cost. Some of that comes from regulatory issues, and some of it just comes from the nature that right now there's other sources that are cheaper. And I don't really think we'll see nuclear fully develop until we're able to change the cost structure of nuclear. I feel like I've rambled a lot. I hope I've answered your question, but those are kind of the fuel sources that come to mind. I'm sure I've missed some, but those are the first ones that come to mind.
All right, thank you. We've had quite a few people join us. We have just about 120 people who are part of the meeting right now, and I would just like to repeat the instructions for asking a question for those who've joined us since we've started. So if you've just joined and you'd like to ask a question, just type your question in the Q&A box at the bottom right hand of your screen. So be sure to post it in Q&A and not in the chat feature. Okay, our next question will come from Bob Lavender. And Bob, you can go ahead with your question now. Okay, why don't I go ahead and read Bob's question?
Okay.
Okay, Congress clearly does not have the will to stop running up trillions of dollars in deficits. How about moving the national debt off the government's balance sheet to the balance sheets of individual taxpayers so they're aware of their personal debt?
So I can't emphasize enough how accurate you are, and what a great frustration to me to be from a state like Utah that is so fiscally well managed, that balances our budget. As a mayor, I had to balance my budget. Counties balance their budget. The state balanced their budget. And in this environment back in Washington, where if I'm truthful, even my Republican colleagues, and it's always been a Republican brand to be fiscally conservative, are not seeming to care about the deficit. One of my very first votes in Congress was the $200 million debt ceiling increase. And that was under Republican leadership. Paul Ryan was our speaker at the time. And I don't mind telling you, I was lobbied. I was lobbied hard. I had my lapel pins, grabbed my lapel pins and told me how I was going to vote. And I got a phone call from each member of leadership every 30 minutes before the vote. And I just kept telling them, I can't vote for that. I'm from Utah. We don't do things that way. And I've tried really hard, and I won't give up trying. That's my commitment to get my colleagues to take this seriously. I have introduced some legislation. Let me just mention two that I think would really make a serious change in this framework. One is it's Utah's baseline budget, and I've introduced this in Congress. So Utah, at the beginning of every legislative session, we agree that if we don't agree on a budget, that we revert to last year's budget. Nobody wants to do that. It's a slight decrease in spending because of inflation. It doesn't adjust where people need more money. And so there's a great motivation to get the budget done. Also, it makes sure that you don't go into a shutdown. I've been in Congress long enough to know that shutdowns are incredibly expensive. And what happens when we go into a shutdown mode is everybody gets so much pressure to reopen the government, they agree to things they wouldn't otherwise agree to. And I've seen that firsthand. And so that one bill I really like, and trying to get some momentum behind that. The other bill is what we do when we're in an emergency and we're spending money. So I think the nation understood that early on we spent trillions of dollars on COVID. And it felt to all of us like that was the appropriate thing to do. Well, if that's the case, we still need to pay it back. And one of the problems right now with emergency spending is it's kind of this free space where you don't have to have any accountability for it. So the bill that I introduced a few weeks ago simply says, if we spend money in emergency, that's okay. But Congress must come up with a plan to pay it back over 10 years. And clearly over 10 years, it would ease the pain of it. And if they don't come up with a plan within 2 years, that it would move to sequestration. And I'm trying to get some momentum behind that. So I totally get your point. You're absolutely right. It is very frustrating to see members on both parties not really care about this, but there are still some of us caring about it back there, and some of us that actually see how important it is.
All right, thank you. Our next question is going to come from Bennett Cookson. And Bennett, you can go ahead.
Okay, is my mic on?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm concerned about spending, just like you said, way too much has been spent. and it seems, I mean, we need to do something, but it seems like overspent. And then also specifically where you have many of these states and cities where they just kind of allowed the violence to go on and on and on, they're going to be huge costs there. And I don't think it's fair for them to come back and try to say that the government should pay for that when it's their local governments being irresponsible.
Yeah, and I'll add to that a point that many of them have gotten into trouble with state pensions, and they're now asking the federal government. There's this like guise going on that somehow, because we're spending so much on COVID, they can just ask for this extra money, and all of this extra trillions of dollars will solve all the problems that they've not been willing to solve. A number of years ago, Utah made some very hard decisions in regard to pensions, some very painful decisions, but they were fiscally smart decisions, and other states have not done that. And you mentioned, this violence and the cost of this violence, and feeling like, oh, we'll just ask the federal government to bail us out. Here's what people forget: federal money is not federal money; it's state money, it's individual money, and so it's this fallacy to think, oh, we're just going to go to the federal government and they're going to give us a bunch of money. Well, whose money do you think that is that we're giving you? And somehow that escapes them, that ultimately it is their money, and just not made it painful enough for them to realize that. And we do that by running up these huge deficits. But at the end of the day, the federal government has no way to get money other than taking it away from individuals and from states.
All right, our next question is going to come from Glenn Bullock. Okay,
Hi.
Go ahead, Glenn.
Thank you. Thank you, Congressman, for taking my question.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're aware, but I've done some research on the mortality rates for coronavirus. The CDC says that it's 0.26%, which means that 2.6 people out of 1,000 die from it, those that contract it. I think it's lower than that. I think there's some false positives, and clearly the denominator is bigger. There are those who have contracted it that didn't know they had it, and also who didn't report it.
Right.
So I also have done some research and seen that on average, the person that does die from it is 80 years old.
Yeah.
That's not a rounding up. He's just 80.
Right.
And as you know, the mortality, the life expectancy in the United States is 78 years old.
Right.
So it seems like we are doing all that we're doing in order to reduce the chance that our great-grandparents can contract COVID. Now, given that information, it seems like if we continue to protect that segment of the population that is vulnerable to COVID, and the rest of us go back to living our lives without social distancing, without mask wearing, I wondered if you had any thoughts on that, if you would support a movement in that direction.
Well, I'm going to first of all agree with you. I think as we get more and more information, we're going to find out the mortality rate is less than we thought it was. And the exact point you've made that I've been watching is we know a lot of people get this disease and it's never reported. I think another thing that's really hard to calculate, we may never really know the answer to, is of those who on their death certificate it says they died from COVID, what other underlying conditions were there, and perhaps COVID was a contributing cause, but it's just not as simple as they died from COVID, and that also makes this very difficult. Now, I think your real question is, well what to do about it, and part of that I think is what should we have done about it, and what should we do about it going forward. What we should have done about it is a difficult question, because policymakers didn't really have, in my opinion, the right data as they were making decisions. And I don't know who to blame that on. I think COVID has stumped us from the beginning, and we've not really understood it as well as we should have from the beginning. And I'm not really sure, who to point the finger at for that. But I know policymakers had to make decisions thinking that the mortality rate was much higher. I also believe we don't yet know everything about this disease. It was reported, I think, last week that those who contract COVID, much like smallpox, will carry this disease with them their entire life and might have symptoms manifest themselves later on, heart conditions and things like that. And I think that complicates the answer as well. And to be frank, we still don't have enough data about that in order for policymakers to make good decisions. I think one thing is very, very clear to me, and that is much of the burden of this, and I will compliment our governor on this, because for the most part, he has left this up to individual personal responsibility and personal decision-making. Now, there's been a lot of guidance from the state, but for the most part, the state has really left this up to a lot of personal responsibility. I think each and every one of us has some serious personal responsibility to protect those of our loved ones that are 80 years old, to protect those who might have underlying conditions, and to make sure that they're safe. And that probably is best done on a one-by-one basis and not broad mandates from government. I think because we can be carriers and not know it, I can just tell you my personal decision is to wear a mask when I'm in public. Now, I'm not perfect, and I worry about the day somebody's going to shoot a photo of me out there without a mask, but I try really hard because I don't know when I'm a carrier and when I'm not a carrier. And I feel a personal responsibility to make sure that I'm not spreading this disease. And so I do believe that as we get more information and more data, we owe it to ourselves to go back and ask these questions. I think people are already questioning whether or not a mass shutdown was the right thing to do. I personally believe that we've learned how to conduct restaurants and shopping and malls and theaters and still keep people safe at the same time.
All right, thank you. Okay, our next question is going to come from JT Whitehead. And before I take this question, I just want to say there are a lot of hard-hitting questions in the queue, but I think this is an important one to take. This is from a political science major. He's wondering about how you came to your political beliefs. And I think it's important that we learn to talk with young people about, the political options that are out there for them. So JT, go ahead and ask your question. JT, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so specifically, I've been trying to wonder recently about how people come to the things that they specifically believe. And not kind of the aspect of, oh, I am right-leaning or I'm Republican, I'm left-leaning, I'm Democrat, but like, why do I believe specifically what the government should do in its life? Does that make sense?
Yeah, let me try to answer that question, and hopefully I've understood it correctly. I'm going to put things in different categories and try to give you some examples. So I don't know if you heard, but yesterday I gave a speech on my views about the environment. And there were some pretty, to be frank, some pretty bold views that went against the grain. And those views are based upon a very strong internal feeling of what is right and what is wrong and what is expected of me as somebody that walks this earth. And I don't mind saying that I feel that a higher power or inspiration has guided me in those views. Now, there's other issues that I don't view that way, that are more an intellectual decision. And so we've talked a little bit tonight about fiscal issues. And I come to my decisions on fiscal issues based more upon a lifelong experience of owning a business, of working for other people, of being a mayor and running a city. And I would say my fiscal decisions are based really on that experience that I've had and that kind of that life learning experiences that I've had. I think there are other decisions. I'm thinking maybe, for instance, of positions on immigration that I don't mind telling you have evolved. And having traveled to countries in South America, having been to the border, having talked to our farmers and ranchers, every one of those has impacted my decision. So I guess from that viewpoint, I would say, listening to other people and trying to learn and understand an issue. And so I think the best answer I can give you is there is no single, for me, way that I formulate my opinions. That each issue is very, very different. And I'm using a different set of criteria to get me to where I'm at. I've changed on certain issues. I've changed just since I've been to Congress. And that's been based upon what I've learned and what I've seen. My whole position on the climate has evolved, and yesterday's speech was really a culmination of many years of trying to understand and study what the answers are. So I feel a little bit like I'm babbling, and I hope I've answered your question. But that's been my experience in coming up with policy positions.
All right, thank you. Our next question is going to come from Mac McDonald. Go ahead, Mac. You are on with the Congressman.
Thank you. Appreciate this opportunity, Congressman. Appreciate your introduction of your new bill to try to keep that money at the cities and counties level. Stop them from taking it back from us. It's hard enough to spend by November anyways. And
yeah, that was an easy bill for us to do.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. But anyways, my question is related to the CARES Act funding, and especially participating and helping out with the Navajo Nation, where you have a severe lack of infrastructure. How do we get past some of the federal bureaucracy that stands in the way of getting projects through? We've had one, and this is a secondary water system here in San Juan County that's taken almost 3 years. It's just been stuck in bureaucratic hurdles on the federal government side, and that's just secondary water, to try to get CARES Act funds applied to water infrastructure on the Navajo Nation without relaxing some of the rules or getting more participation at the federal level. Just seems pretty difficult.
Yeah. Let me just say, I found few things as complex as navigating federal regulations, tribal regulations, county regulations, school district regulations, right? That all come to kind of like pile up together to make it really hard to do work on the Navajo reservation. It is a sovereign nation, and that adds a layer of complexity that's very, very difficult to navigate. I think the best answer I could give you is that one by one we take these bottlenecks, and between the Navajo Nation, the county, and my office, and others who are willing to get involved, we just keep hammering on one single thing until we get it, if that makes sense. I'm kind of reminded a little bit of the roads issue and getting the county authorized to take care of the roads. I think it wasn't until we really just said, okay, we're going to focus on one issue. And I would just offer my office up as really willing to do that and to focus on, a single issue and just kind of pound away at it until we get it through.
Okay, appreciate your help with that.
Absolutely, you bet.
All right, Congressman, I think that we have time for maybe one more question. So our last question will come from Debbie Bratt. Go ahead, Debbie.
Have we got Debbie?
Can you hear us? Push it again, Deb.
Yeah, we got you now. Adriel, we know how to get them.
Muted again, so they.
There we go. We got you. I can hear you.
We know that approximately 70% of the state of Utah is owned by the feds, and they pay, I understand, approximately $40 million per year. But in reality, I understand the Utah State Legislature recognizes that it really should be around over $400 million per year, and they haven't done that for years. Are you helping with that, getting involved, putting pressure on the feds to assist the state legislature on any of that?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that the entire delegation would like to see that changed. It's just really a huge problem. Imagine, and you used a number that kind of represents the state overall, but I have 4 counties that are over 90% federal land. So imagine, and property taxes is generally how we pay for schools, roads, police, fire, parks. So many of the services that you would find in cities and towns and counties that don't have a lot of public land. And so imagine going into these cities where 90% of your property pays a fraction of what it would if it was in private hands. And I believe a lot of the conflict that we have between local and federal when it comes to public lands would be solved if the federal government would step up and pay their fair share. And so I would just tell you that it's not just me, but our whole delegation sees this issue and is trying to find a path forward to get the appropriate amount of funding for these counties that are just besieged with federal land.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. You bet.
All right. Thank you very much, Congressman Curtis. And thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. That's just about all the time that we have for this evening. But for those of you who did not get a chance to ask Congressman Curtis your question, you can call the office anytime to speak with someone on our staff. And I have put the office phone number in the chat. You can see that off to the right side of the screen. So you can take that down. The phone number is 202-225-7751. And you can call the office anytime to ask whatever questions were not answered for you this evening. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. And now, Congressman Curtis, would you like to wrap up with a few final remarks?
I sure would. This has been great. And I've been reminded tonight of how we need to do this more often. We'll get back to the public ones. We're already toying with how we can do some face-to-face town hall meetings. And we'll continue to experiment with different formats. These can't be successful without all of you, and I appreciate all of you taking the time and asking the questions. I regret that we didn't get to all the questions. I'm going to read through them myself and see how we can try to get answers out to all of you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your support, and hope our paths cross in person very soon.
Thank you very much, and thanks, everyone. Have a great night.